俺は人間をやめるぞジョジョ俺は人間を超越する石仮面なぜ君が
Hello everybody, this is Joey from This Square Hole, and today we are going to go over whether if Dio can defeat every other villain in JoJo's Bizarre Adventures. So before we begin, I'd like to give credit to Metas and Caleb IA. They influenced how strong I believe these characters are and how their abilities work. So with that being said, we can get started on this by scaling every single form of Dio, including Part 1 Dio, Part 3 Dio, and Awakened Dio after he steals Joseph's blood, and Dio over Heaven. Starting off with Part 1 Dio, this guy is no joke. Before he became a vampire, he was already quite the athlete in his day. Did football and boxing and whatnot. Only ever really lost to Jonathan and a vampire up to this point. So when he did become a vampire, he was quite the strong character. He got enhanced strength, speed, and senses. He got blood sucking, body manipulation, which included regeneration. He got vaporizing freeze, which froze limbs and by extension blood on contact. And Space Ripper Stingy Eyes, which is a long-range projectile that can easily cut through flesh. And he can live as just a head, so he can possess other people. And he did that to Jonathan at the end of the part. And this would all be balanced if this guy was stupid, but no, this dude is smart. He came up with Vaporizing Freeze to counter Hamon. And it's basically impossible to kill him without Hamon's sunlight or Stroheim's lights. If you don't have those, you are in big trouble. And he only ever really lost because of his ego. He kept sending minions Jonathan's way and let him get stronger. And even after the fact, he still tried to push the limits of his abilities constantly. Like, if he just got rid of the group right then and there, then he would not have had half the trouble that he would have. And yes, I believe that Dio is firmly the strongest character in this part. And that ego will not go away anytime soon with any of his other forms. Now, we have gone over some pretty absurd abilities that Dio has that makes him near impossible to kill. Blood sucking and regeneration and whatnot. Pretty absurd abilities. Now, if we added Time Stop into the mix, that makes it sound a lot harder to kill him, right? Well, he gets it, and we have Part 3 Dio. Part 3 Dio is such a strong character, and not that many people talk about it. So, in the beginning of the part, he does have Jonathan Joestar's body. But it was rejecting him, so he was not quite as physically strong as he was before. We don't see him using Vaporizing Freeze or Space Ripper Stingy Eyes, so maybe he can't use those abilities. However, what he trades for those is one of the most powerful stands in the entire series, being the World. The World has the ability to stop time for a set amount of seconds, and has the stats of Star Platinum almost, and, unlike King Crimson, he can actually interact with the world around him. So he can evade attacks and can donut people if he wants to. So this guy is pretty strong, and that's not even the strongest form of Dio in this part. After he takes Joseph Joestar's blood, he becomes Awakened Dio. He becomes much more powerful, much faster, more durable, and has improved regeneration, as shown when he took a blow from Star Platinum no problem, and continued to fight Jotaro to almost win the fight. It goes without saying that this form of Dio is much more powerful than the previous form, and he can likely solo parts of JoJo's by himself. Now, am I going to say which parts those are? No, because that will spoil the rest of the video. But it goes without saying that this form of Dio is absolutely absurd, and it's even crazier to think that this isn't the strongest form of Dio that we've talked about so far. Now, Dio over Heaven is by far the biggest leap in power that Dio has ever experienced in any media that I have seen. Dio over Heaven is such an absurd character. He has all the same abilities as before, but they are all so much more powerful, and he got the ability to rewrite reality with things that he comes in contact with. He can negate abilities, he has improved regeneration, he can revive and control the dead, and use their abilities, and those are only some of the abilities shown in Eyes of Heaven. He is so much more powerful that Funny Valentine with D4C Love Train, with the corpse parts, in his own words, cannot beat him. And also, in the first thing that we see of Dio over Heaven, he defeats Tusk Act 4, Prime Star Platinum the World, and GR by himself easily. This man said no to no. This man is so strong, and this form is just absurd. He is about the second strongest character I can think of behind, we're gonna get to that one. So, with that being said, we can go ahead and get to the scaling in this. Can Dio defeat every single villain in JoJo's, and what form would it take to do it? Now, I think it is important to establish a win condition in this video, just so we can be clear on how the opponents are supposed to win this fight. So, one way to do it is to destroy Dio's head to where he can't regenerate. And that is a pretty big one there. His weaknesses do include hormones, sunlight, and his own ego. His own ego definitely cost him a lot of fights. I think it gave his opponents a lot more opportunities at victory. And the fact that he just straight up just plays with his food all the time. And that's something that doesn't change with every form of Dio. It's costed him every big fight he's ever had. So with that being said, we can go ahead and get started with Part 1 Dio versus Part 3 Dio. Now look, this is just mean, okay? Part 1 Dio has no chance in this fight. Like, in terms of knowledge, Part 3 Dio knows everything Part 1 Dio can do, and all of them get answered with time stop. And even if he did, I don't even think Part 1 Dio had the brute force to actually destroy Part 3 Dio's head just so he can win the fight. And time stop is a very big reason. And in the midst of time stop, he could just destroy Part 1 Dio's head to win the fight for him. And also no ego advantage either, because both of them are Dio. So I think Part 3 Dio takes this round negative difficulty. Now to move on to Part 1 Dio versus Cars. Now look, this is not a fair fight either. Part 1 Dio doesn't have a chance in this fight. Like, Polar Men are straight up stated to be stronger than vampires and have all their abilities, and all the same weaknesses but nowhere near as bad. Like, Cars is straight up smarter, faster, and stronger, and after seeing Dio's improvements like with Vaporizing Freeze or Space Rip or Stingy Eyes, he's likely to use those abilities himself, because, you know, I'm sure he could come up with that quite a bit quicker than Dio can. So, with that being said, Part 1 Dio doesn't have a chance in this fight. Let's go on to Part 3 Dio versus Cars. Like, in this situation, yeah, time stop's a big deal, and having Star Platinum stats on that thing on top of that is absurd. But he still doesn't have the raw power it takes to kill Cars at all, or even damage it beyond what his regeneration can reasonably fix. So, like, Cars is still much more physically powerful. Like, to where, like, if he hits Dio, he can very likely die. Like, in this situation, I see it being more of a stalemate when practically speaking, but if Dio's cocky enough to tell him about the stand, he kind of loses because Cars can work around it, and he can just, you know, just win the fight right then and there. So, this round is also favored for Cars. Now that we've gone over that, we can go ahead and talk about Dio over Heaven versus Cars. So, this time around, yeah, Dio finally gets a W here. Like, all of his abilities, like reality warping and all that, increased stats and everything to where he can beat Tusk Act 4 and GER, yeah, I'm pretty sure he can beat Cars at this point. Like, with even just his raw power alone, it should be enough. So, now does it change when we go into Ultimate Lifeform Cars? No. I believe Dio over Heaven is quite the hacked ability. It lets him warp reality, which is not a no limits, but enough to beat Infinite Energy in Tusk Act 4, and saying no to GER is a bit too absurd for me. So, I'm not sure. I think Dio over Heaven just takes this one too, and does so solidly. Now we are going to talk about Dio over Heaven versus Novel Cars from the Jorge Joestar novel. Now, okay, this is absurd. These are two characters with such absurd abilities, but Cars in this whole thing is so absurd. He merged with over 30 copies of himself, so I'd imagine that the strength stacked. Not only that, but there are multiple stands that this guy has. Like, this guy literally has White Snake. He has, you know what, we're going to go over the stands that he has on screen right now that all of us know, because there are some made up stands in this novel that I will need to go over. Like, an upgraded version of White Snake, an upgraded version of Sea Moon, the upgraded version of the World, which can stop time for an hour, upgraded Killer Queen, upgraded D4C, which keeps the immortality bit, and lets him create other universes. Dude gets Made in Heaven, which is buffed, and look, I can't even go over all of the nonsense that this dude has. Like, after you hear all of this, you'd probably go nuts, but find a wiki page on this. It's absolutely unbelievable. So, in this fight, yeah, Novel Cars absolutely stomps this, and it's not even close. Like, see the list for yourself, because there's a couple of made-up stands here, too. Like, Das Boot, which is Naracha's stand in that series. Like, if it sounds absurd to you, give it a read or a listen. It will blow your mind, because the plot also doesn't make sense, but that's beside the point. Novel Cars wins this fight, negative difficulty. So the next round is going to be Kira versus Dio, starting off with part 1 Dio. So Kira solidly wins this fight, and that's for one big reason. Dio cannot see stands at this point, so he cannot deal with Killer Queen, and since Killer Queen can blow up things on contact, yeah, that's going to blow up Dio's head, and that's that. So Kira takes this round. In fact, from now on, I'm going to stop talking about part 1 Dio, because he just loses to everyone else just because he can't see stands. Now, let's look at Kira's moveset to see how he stacks up against Part 3 Dio. So, the first bomb, he can turn anything into a bomb. He can turn a coin, or even a doorknob into a bomb as shown against Shigechi. So would that be enough to kill Dio? I don't know, because he does not kill Shigechi on his first try, so I don't think that Part 3 Dio is going to die from that kind of bomb. But that's beside the point. Let's assume that it can kill Dio, because if it's close enough, it might blow his head off, you know? Let's assume the absolute best for him. Now, the second bomb, Sheer Heart Attack, is a little toy car that chases people based on their body temperature, and it detonates on contact. So, I think this for sure would be enough to kill Dio if it goes straight for the head. Now, Bites of Dust is an ability that lets Killer Queen go into the body of someone else. And if a third person comes up and knows who Kira is to the person where Killer Queen is inside of, it blows up the person who knows of Kira, and it reverses time for an hour for him and the person with Killer Queen inside. So would any of these be enough to beat Dio? No, absolutely not. I really hope I built that up well, because he did not have a chance in this fight. Time Stop answers both the first bombs. Like, he just answers both 1 and 2 with Time Stop, and Bites of Dust leaves Kira completely open. Now, if Kira did use the thing that he does in All-Star Battle R, where he throws Hayato where Killer Queen is inside of him, would he win the fight? Yes, but it would also require him to go in planning to lose, and go in without Killer Queen. So if he goes against Dio without Killer Queen out, and he gets hit with Time Stop, he's dead, end of story. Dio wins this round, low difficulty. Now we can go over Dio versus Diavolo. This round is interesting because both characters have time-related abilities. With Epitaph and King Crimson, he can see 10 seconds into the future, and he can skip time up to those 10 seconds into the future. And he just completely escapes any kind of fate that comes his way, as he can reposition himself and he becomes intangible in those situations. So, very good, right? One big weakness, however, is that he cannot interact with the world around him, unlike the world, because that's just how the ability works. So, because of that one fact alone, I think Dio takes this round. Time Stop allows Dio to just attack people in the midst of Time Stop. And that one thing, even if Time Razor's used, at best, Diavolo is coming away with a tie. He's not doing any damage to Dio. And even then, with his usual, classic Dio donut attack, he doesn't actually do any real damage because Dio can regenerate. So I think eventually Dio takes this round. Pretty low difficulty, maybe medium if Diavolo is slippery enough. I don't see how Diavolo can win this fight. We have another interesting round in Dio versus Pucci, in the sense that Pucci got his motivation from Dio. So you would imagine that he's pretty strong, and he is. Whitesnake has the ability to take people's memories and stands and puts them into discs, completely disabling them just by contact. So this ability is really good, and you would imagine it being an effective one-shot tool against Dio, and it is. Only problem is Time Stop kind of answers that. Now, it's kind of odd to think that so many of these fights kind of end with the Time Stop donut punch, but it is that simple a lot of the time. And that's if he wants it to be with his ego boosting. This is the first villain that would just plainly take advantage of Dio's ego if he wanted to. Only problem is that most of Pucci's fights and his approaches to fights are very sneaky and very, very methodical. And whereas in this situation, that's not applicable, considering that I kind of just put in fighter, fighter, who wins. And Pucci generally got most of his W's from sneak attacks and taking advantage of other people around him. And since none of that really applies to Dio, and it doesn't really deal with time stop, yeah, he doesn't really have much of a chance in this fight. So I think Dio takes this round low difficulty. Maybe mid difficulty if Pucci can massage his ego enough to make him just not use time stop. And not much of this changes with C Moon. Pucci becomes the center of gravity, which I would imagine is a pretty big surprise factor, and C Moon could just invert gravity of things that he comes in contact with, so hitting someone like Jolene, which just turns their organs and hands or whatever else inside out, is, I would imagine that's enough to kill Dio. Again, problem is that none of it deals with time stop at all, and that's a big, big problem. He could just donut him afterwards and win the fight like that too. So yeah, Dio takes this round 2. And lastly, we're on to Made in Heaven Pucci versus Dio. Now, this is an ability that finally interacts with time stop because it shortens it, at least the first time he uses it anyway. But that's not the point. Like to say that it still does, that still shortens Dio's time stop. So he also has infinite speed, which he uses to blitz multiple people and kill them in a quick go. So that should be enough to kill Dio if he goes straight for the head, which I imagine that he would straight up just go for it. And the fact that he can probably make contact and take discs at that speed, because stand upgrades generally keep the original abilities of the user. So I would think that's very good and that he has an excellent shot at winning the fight. Assuming that Dio doesn't use time stop and just donuts him if he wants to in the situation, which is doable, but way harder. Like, Pucci would have none of the leverage to prevent him from killing him in that situation if he got close, similar to how he did with Jotaro, using Jolene as bait to make sure he doesn't get the clean hit that he needed to kill him. So Dio has more of a chance than that Jotaro, considering that he was just straight up stronger than that version of Jotaro with a longer time stop. So it's tough to say who wins this round. I'll be charitable and say that Pucci takes this round, considering that he keeps all of his abilities from the past forms. Lastly, we have Dio over Heaven versus Pucci with Made in Heaven. I don't think this is a surprise to anyone that this is a stomp in Dio's favor. Like, reality rewriting can straight up just rewrite the fact that the universe is being reset and Pucci loses the speed boost. Like, that kind of thing could very well happen. Like, he did it with Tuscatch 4 to where it didn't just break Dio over Heaven apart. And I'd imagine that's a much stronger stand than Made in Heaven is in isolation. So yes, I would say Dio takes this round with such little difficulty that it's kind of a footnote in this video. And now we go into part 7, talking about Dio versus Diego. And considering that Diego is the reincarnation of Dio in the new timeline, it's a pretty interesting battle to go over. So Diego's ability, Scary Monsters, allows him to turn into a dinosaur. And he gets increased strength, speed, and senses. Even passively, even when he isn't fully turned into a dinosaur, he does have those increased senses. So that's pretty good, right? Especially for a race in this situation. Now, do any of these answer time stop? No. No, they don't. So, you know the song and dance. Time stop, donut punch, end of story. Kinda sad, really. However, we can follow this up with AU Diego versus Dio. AU Diego, instead of Scary Monsters, gets time stop, so he's also able to stop time for 5 seconds. So, does this put him on the even playing field with Dio? Still no. Like, Dio's still a vampire with most, if not all, of his abilities. Still faster and stronger than your average human, and Diego has no such abilities that would put him over a vampire. And considering that, you know, either one can move in each other's time stop, that's no longer a strength that either of them can use, and Dio could just overpower Diego anyway, so Diego loses this round, probably worse than part 1 Dio. And now on to the second to last round, being Dio versus Funny Valentine. So Funny Valentine has the ability to go between dimensions by going between any 2 surfaces, like a flag to the ground like he normally does, or a crevice between seats, whatever you could think of, he can likely go between those and go into another dimension. And in that situation, he can pass his stand onto another version of himself, allowing himself to essentially have infinite bodies for D4C to transfer to, as his stand could just do that. It's a pretty ridiculous ability and pretty much grants him pseudo-immortality. And also, he has the ability to send other people between those dimensions. And if another version of that person comes across the original person that goes into that dimension that isn't Funny Valentine, they just explode. Like, they die. Like, that would be more than enough to kill Dio, obviously. The main problem is that Time Stop deals with both of those. Diego found a way to kill Funny Valentine despite it by giving him an instant death. And he almost succeeds in doing that. And considering that Diego is the literal reincarnation of Dio, I would imagine a similar intelligence can be expected of Dio. So that deals with the dimension travel ability. Now if he is caught in the dimension travel and he comes across another version of himself, I would imagine Time Stop could also deal with that. Only problem is that I would imagine that Dio would also be able to move in Time Stop and just kill him and himself. So that's a tough call. Like, he can still kill Funny Valentine, but I can kind of see it coming away with a tie because of that exact situation. But at best, Funny Valentine is coming away with a tie pre-Love Train. And as for D4C Love Train, which is an ability that deflects all states of misfortune, including damage, with all of his past abilities still in his back pocket, yeah, Dio cannot win this fight at all. Like, Tusk Act 4 was literally infinite energy, which is how he even broke through it in the first place, which is insane to think about. Tusk Act 4 is an absurd stand. Like, with something like that being needed to even damage Funny Valentine, that's just ludicrous, and Dio does not have anything like that. Time Stop does not deal with Love Train at all. So Funny Valentine with D4C Love Train wins this round, no difficulty. As for Dio over Heaven versus Funny Valentine, we've been over that in the intro. He would not win this fight. Funny Valentine loses. He has no chance in this fight. He said even with the quartz parts, he couldn't beat Dio over Heaven. So that's an open and shut case. Dio wins that round. And now we're on to the last round, being Dio versus Wonder of You. So in this fight, this isn't really a fight. It's a slaughter. Wonder of You wins this round so hard it's not even funny. Like, even perceiving the stand, thinking of the stand, whatever it may be, like, even just perceiving him, even thinking of who Tooru is, activates the stand. And its ability allows it to just cause many unfortunate, calamitous events to happen. And they do so much more damage. Like, it's not even close to a fair fight. And the fact that the stand is still active even after Tooru's death is insane. So I don't see how Dio can win this fight, even in Time Stop. If he kills Tooru, then yeah, Wonder of You is still activated, and he could just straight up just die and have something just hit him in the head. He just doesn't have a chance in this fight at all. And lastly, we're going to go over Dio over Heaven versus Wonder of You. So this is tough, really tough, because I can bring in character arguments to where it's really tough for Dio to do anything, but I can also just metagame it and just say that Dio over Heaven makes contact with Wonder of You under the same situations that Pucci was under, and he wins the fight just by punching Wonder of You and just rewriting it so it doesn't exist or whatever. Something could happen, like anything like that could happen, but we're going to be fair and use character arguments to show that Dio over Heaven can still lose this fight. He straight up just takes his time a lot of the time, even to start a fight most of the time, which even perceiving Wonder of You starts the calamity cycle that Wonder of You manipulates. So many disastrous things can happen. Even just tripping on a pebble, his head could just explode like a watermelon. Like, something like that can happen. So if we're going to take that into account, yes, I think Wonder of You also wins this round. assuming that we go into in-character things, even just perceiving him, seeing him, thinking of him, starts the calamity cycle, which is crazy to me. The definition of pursuing is quite loose in Wonder of View's ability. So, if we're talking about in-character and how much Dio likes taking his time, then yes, he would absolutely lose this fight. But under optimal conditions, he can just time stop and then just punch, rewrite reality, because we don't see him time stop and then rewrite reality, which he probably can't, but with a small time frame between them to where he could just do that. I can imagine Dio having to do that and win this fight. But talking in character, I think Dio loses this fight against Wonder of View. So in conclusion, Dio comes away with a strong record across the board, only losing to Novel Cars and Wonder of View. So no, he cannot beat every single villain in JoJo's. A tough pill to swallow for our vampire time-stopping friend here. But tell me what you think in the comments. And while you're at it, go ahead and hit the subscribe button if you want to. I plan on making more content like this, and if y'all support it, it tells me to make more of these. So have a good rest of the day, and until the next time, take care of yourselves.
Arrivederci.